I never believed the legends about wild beings hidden in the northern forests until the night one of them nearly froze to death on my doorstep. That winter had already buried my little cabin under a white silence so deep it seemed to erase the world beyond the tree line. I'd chosen this solitude years ago, after a divorce that hollowed me out. 20 acres of remote Montana timberland, a single-room cabin of pine boards and stubborn nails, a wood stove breathing warmth into the long dark. No neighbors for miles. No voices but my own. February came with a storm so violent it felt like the sky wanted to grind the earth to powder. Wind slammed the roof in angry bursts. Snow hammered the windows until daylight and night were the same dim blur. For 3 days the gale roared like a living thing, a spirit wrapped in hair and anger, scouring every ridge and hollow. When the wind finally surrendered, the quiet pressed against my ears, a strange, heavy hush as if the forest were holding a thought it refused to share. I stepped outside into drifts that swallowed my legs to the thigh, the world a blank page of white. While I shoveled a path to the propane tank, a thin sound floated through the stillness, a wavering whimper, distant but deliberate. It didn't belong to the storm's aftermath. It was the sound of something alive. I followed it toward the black lace of pines at the edge of my property, breath frosting in the brittle air, flashlight trembling in my glove. The noise led me to a fallen spruce where the snow gathered like crushed pearls. Beneath its shadow crouched a small figure, no bigger than a preschooler. My mind fumbled for explanation, a lost child? But the proportions were wrong, limbs too long, chest broad like a climber's, dark hair, dense as wet moss, covered every inch of skin. Frost filmed its mouth and nostrils. The lips were blue. It didn't stir when I knelt. Only a shallow flutter beneath its ribs told me life still clung there. Some instinct louder than fear pushed me forward. I wrapped the little body in my coat and heaved it into my arms. It was astonishingly heavy, muscles coiled beneath the fur like compact steel. The trek back was a slow war against the snow. Each step burned my lungs with needles of cold. I half expected claws or teeth at any moment, but the creature stayed limp, breath a fragile thread against my chest. Inside the cabin, I laid it by the stove, the firelight painting the coarse hair in flickers of copper. I worked from muscle memory wilderness, first aid training from years past warming it in layers, a hot water bottle against its heart, blankets piled thick as a bear's den. Hours slid by with the tick of thawing ice. I kept checking for a pulse, certain it would vanish between one breath and the next. Near noon, a faint tremor passed through its shoulders. The blue faded from its lips. The heartbeat steadied. Relief washed over me like sudden spring. Still, I couldn't name what I'd brought into my home. Its face, half human yet not, held a strange harmony of familiarity and the unknown like a myth too stubborn to die. When evening deepened, the creature's breathing settled into the slow rhythm of sleep. Outside, the moon broke through ragged clouds, throwing silver ladders across the untouched snow. I stood at the window, aware of a presence beyond the ordinary. The forest, once just timber and shadow, seemed to lean closer, as if watching with ancient patience. I returned to the stove and sat near my silent guest, listening to the soft crackle of burning spruce. 1,000 questions prowled the edges of my mind, but only one truth mattered. Whatever this being was, it had come to me on the edge of death, and now its survival rested in my hands. By morning, the cabin smelled of damp fur and wood smoke. I woke to a faint rustle and found two wide, obsidian eyes fixed on me from beside the stove. They held the careful stillness of something that knew it was being watched, but wasn't sure whether to trust the watcher. I spoke in a low voice meant to bridge the distance nonsense words, just sound and calm. The creature blinked once, twice, then drew its knees tighter to its chest, as if deciding whether I was danger or refuge. I poured warm water into a tin cup and set it within reach. After a moment, it reached back. The fingers were long, the nails thick and blunt, the motion tentative yet deliberate. It sipped with a quick dart of the tongue, then exhaled a tiny puff of steam that carried a strange sweet scent, almost like crushed cedar. As hours passed, we became a quiet duet. I moved about the cabin stoking the fire, checking the snow load on the roof while it tracked me with unbroken attention. By afternoon, it tottered to its feet. Despite its size, it moved with a liquid balance that made the floorboards sigh more than creak. It touched the kettle, the window latch, the edge of my warm table, each gesture an unspoken question. Hunger eventually broke the spell. I offered dried venison and a handful of frozen berries. It rejected the meat, but devoured the berries with a soft, chirring sound that vibrated like a purr. When I brought out more, it surprised me by carefully offering the first berry back in exchange, not just feeding. That small act rearranged something in me. This wasn't an animal taking charity. It was a being negotiating trust. Night fell early, draping the forest in indigo. We sat near the stove, the only light a restless amber flicker. The creature reached toward the fireglass, mesmerized by the glow. Its humming rose and fell in a pattern that almost formed melody, a tune older than language. I found myself breathing in time with it, the rhythm settling deep in my chest like a heartbeat I hadn't known I was missing. Over the next days, the storm's aftermath softened. Sunlight returned in sharp, cold shards, and the creature, my unspoken guest, grew stronger. It followed me from chore to chore, padding across the packed snow with uncanny ease. When I chopped firewood, it mimicked the swing of the axe with a stick, not in play, but in studied observation. When I fetched water, it carried a small bucket without spilling a drop. I began to notice details that unsettled and fascinated me. Its feet were broad and padded, spreading across the snow like natural snowshoes. Its nostrils flared to scents I couldn't detect, head tilting toward distant ridges as if listening to frequencies beyond my hearing. Sometimes it froze mid-step, eyes narrowing at the tree line, and a low rumble trembled in its throat. Each time I scanned the forest, I saw only wind-bent pines and drifts of shadow, yet the hair on my arms rose as if an unseen gaze brushed across us. One twilight, while I skinned a rabbit near the porch, it crouched beside me, studying the motion of the knife. Without warning, it picked up a sliver of wood and began scraping it against a stone, awkward but intentional, an echo of my own work. When I smiled and nodded, a quick gleam of what could only be pride flickered in its eyes. By the second week, a new tension crept in. Small arrangements of stones appeared at the edge of my clearing, triangles, spirals, shapes too careful to be accidents. Branches hung from trees in interlocking patterns, like symbols half remembered from a dream. The creature noticed them first, staring long and humming low. At night it stood for hours by the window, gaze fixed on the black forest, as if listening for a call only it could hear. Then the gifts began. One dawn I found a freshly killed rabbit laid neatly on the threshold, its fur unmarked, its body still warm. 2 days later, a cluster of berries bound with dried grass. Each time the creature's reaction was unmistakable. A soft trill of recognition, a brief, searching glance toward the woods. Someone or something was reaching across the dark. The forest itself felt altered. Paths I'd walked 100 times seemed to breathe, the trees leaning closer, their bark etched with faint scratches that hadn't been there the day before. Even the wind carried a different timbre, a low metallic undertone that thrummed like distant machinery. I began to sense that we were no longer alone in this frozen wilderness, that unseen figures moved just beyond the veil of trunks and snow. One evening, as the sky burned with a copper sunset, the creature pressed a carved piece of wood into my hand, a rough figurine shaped like a deer, its surface smoothed by careful work. It looked up at me with an expression I can only call hopeful. My throat tightened. This was no random scrap. It was a message, a bridge between worlds. That night, as the fire dwindled and the forest whispered outside, I realized how far my life had shifted in a matter of weeks. What began as an act of rescue had become something else entirely. A conversation without words, a slow unspooling of boundaries I once thought unbreakable. And still, every dusk, the creature faced the forest, humming into the darkness, waiting for a reply I could not hear. By the third week, the sky itself seemed to listen. The moon rode high and pale above the pines, casting silver seams across the drifts, and the forest no longer felt like mere wilderness. It felt aware. Each time I stepped outside, a hush followed like the trees were weighing my presence. The little one sensed it too. It lingered by the window long after dark, a silhouette of patience, humming those low, mournful notes that carried farther than sound should. I woke one morning to a faint rhythm on the porch, soft, deliberate taps. When I opened the door, a trout lay on a smooth slab of ice, its gills still damp, wrapped in woven leaves. No footprints marred the surrounding snow. Only the creature's wide eyes told me it was not a dream. It chirred a quick sequence, almost celebratory, then looked toward the tree line as if answering a silent summons. The offerings multiplied. A bundle of berries bound with grass, a perfectly shaped antler, a strip of meat cured with an unfamiliar spice. Each appeared without a trace of approach. In return, I began leaving small gifts of my own dried fruit, a carved wooden spoon, a length of cord. By morning, my gifts were always gone, replaced by new tokens of quiet intention. It was an exchange without language, a dialogue etched in frost and shadow. The little one's restlessness grew. At dawn, it would pace near the door, nostrils flaring, ears twitching toward distant ridges. Some nights I woke to find it standing beneath the moon, eyes reflecting an amber glow, breath rising in slow clouds as though sending signals skyward. I could almost feel the unseen watchers beyond the trees, their presence heavy as the weight of snow on a branch. Then came the tracks. Enormous prints pressed deep into the frozen crust, far larger than the little one's feet, wide as my outstretched hands. They circled the clearing, and vanished into black spruce shadows. I followed one set only a short distance before a low vibration pulsed through the ground, a subsonic thrum that seemed to speak of ancient patience. My pulse hammered like a war drum. I turned back. Inside the cabin, the little one touched my arm and made a soft two-note call that resonated in my chest. Not fear, something closer to reassurance, as though it wanted me to know the watchers were kin. Days later, a thin veil of mist crept in with dawn, curling through the pines like smoke from an unseen fire. The creature stood at the threshold, shoulders squared, head high, every line of its body alert. I heard faint answering calls, deep, resonant notes that rolled through the mist and settled in my bones. The little one responded with a rapid, melodic series of sounds, the cadence unmistakably conversational. I stepped outside. The fog wrapped around us in slow ribbons. Shapes stirred beyond the first line of trees' massive, deliberate movements that blurred and reformed between pillars of pine. My breath crystallized in the cold air, each exhale a fragile cloud that seemed to hang longer than it should. The little one turned to me, eyes bright with recognition, and then walked forward with steady resolve. I followed, heart pounding in a rhythm older than words. 10 paces into the forest, the figures emerged, 3 towering forms, silhouettes of living dusk, their outlines shifting against the mist like the forest's own confession. They stopped a few yards away, immense and silent. Their eyes caught the pale light amber, intelligent, unflinching. The little one bounded ahead, releasing a cascade of trills that filled the cold with sudden warmth. One of the giants crouched, arms wide, and the child leapt into its embrace. The reunion was so tender it stole the breath from my chest. The largest figure stepped closer, snow groaning beneath its weight. In its massive hand it held a pouch of cured hide. It knelt until its gaze met mine. For a heartbeat we shared a silence that felt older than the mountains. Then, with careful grace, it placed the pouch between us and made a single resonant sound, a note that seemed to vibrate inside the marrow of my bones. A word without syllables, but heavy with meaning, gratitude. I bent to pick up the pouch. Inside lay carved stones etched with intricate spirals, and a small braid of plant fiber threaded with polished river stones, a necklace of quiet craftsmanship. When I looked up, the giant's eyes held an expression I can only describe as recognition, a mirror of the wonder that pulsed through me. I managed a single word, "Good," my voice raw in the cold. The giant inclined its head, a gesture of solemn understanding. Then, with one last glance, the 3 figures melted back into the mist, their steps leaving only deep, deliberate prints that the fog quickly swallowed. The little one lingered for a heartbeat, meeting my gaze across the snow. It touched the necklace against its own chest, then pointed to mine, a silent promise carved in gesture. A soft hum escaped its throat, an echo of the songs by the fire, before it turned and followed its kin into the waiting forest. I stood there long after the mist dissolved, the necklace warm in my palm, the air thick with the presence that felt both departure and beginning. Back in the cabin, the silence rang different, less empty, more like the pause after a vow. For nights afterward I sensed them near, subtle rearrangements of branches, faint trails of scent like crushed cedar and rain-soaked stone, offerings of meat and berries that appeared while I slept. A bond had been forged in that frozen wilderness, one that neither distance nor language could break. Spring crept into the forest like a slow exhale, loosening the snowpack and painting the ridges with faint strokes of green. The air grew softer, scented with thawed soil and pine resin, but the quiet presence beyond the tree line remained. I'd wake to find new signs of careful attention. A stack of freshly cut firewood where I hadn't left any, a jar of wild honey set on the porch, a woven basket filled with berries that couldn't have ripened so early. Each gift carried the same meticulous intention as those first offerings in winter, as if the forest itself was keeping a silent promise. I wore the stone-threaded necklace always. It warmed against my skin in a way no ordinary object could. Sometimes, when dusk blurred the horizon and the first stars blinked awake, I'd feel a low vibration through the pendant subtle, almost like the heartbeat of the woods answering my own. Whether it was memory or something more, I stopped questioning. I simply listened. The little one visited again when the rivers began to roar with meltwater. I caught sight of it from the corner of my eye, playing at the edge of a clearing half a mile from the cabin. It was taller now, its coat a richer brown, movements powerful and confident. When it noticed me, it paused and raised a long arm in a slow, deliberate wave. The gesture was so unmistakably human, it tightened my throat. I raised my hand in return, and in that silent greeting, I felt the entire winter between us collapse into a single heartbeat of recognition. Then it turned and slipped back into the forest, leaving only a trail of faint footprints that the evening light soon erased. Through the seasons, our exchange continued. Gifts appeared without pattern, a haunch of venison carefully wrapped in bark, a cluster of luminous mushrooms that glowed faintly in the moonlight, polished stones carved with spirals that seemed to move when I traced them with my finger. I answered with small tools, jars of dried fruit, and books sealed in waterproof cloth. They vanished as quietly as they arrived, and in their place I often found new firewood neatly stacked, or my garden cleared of weeds overnight. I never tried to follow the tracks. Part of me feared breaking the fragile covenant we had built. Part of me understood that mystery was the language of our friendship. Photographs or proof would have been a betrayal. This was a relationship written in trust, not in evidence. 2 years passed, like this season's folding over one, another in a rhythm older than any calendar. I began to notice other changes. Deer approached without skittishness. Owls perched closer when I worked by lamplight. Even the wolves, whose distant howls had once chilled me, moved around my cabin like cautious neighbors rather than predators. It was as though the entire forest recognized a silent, pact sealed in that first storm. One winter night, a blizzard swept through, with a fury that rattled the roof and flung ice against the windows. When dawn came, the path to my well was buried under fallen trees, but someone had already been there. The trunks were cut and stacked neatly to the side, a clean corridor open to the water. No footprints remained, just the sure evidence of unseen hands that worked through the night. I no longer wonder if they watch me. I feel them an unseen kinship threaded through every pine needle and raven call. Sometimes, while splitting wood in the blue hush of evening, I sense a presence at the edge of the clearing. I don't turn. I simply nod to the trees and keep working, trusting that they understand. The necklace has become more than a gift. It's a key to a quiet world that lives parallel to ours. When I hold it and close my eyes, I hear layered echoes. The little one's soft humming by the fire, the deep call of the towering figures in the mist, the steady rhythm of the forest breathing around us. It's not language, yet it speaks to something I can't name, a reminder that intelligence and compassion are not ours alone. People sometimes ask if I'm lonely out here. I smile and let the question fade. How could I explain that loneliness ended the moment a dying creature fell into my arms during a once-in-a-decade blizzard? That a family of unknown beings chose me, not as an experiment or a legend, but as a neighbor? I've learned that wonder doesn't need an audience, that some truths are meant to be lived, not proven. The forest and I share a quiet understanding now. I care for the land, and the watchers, my silent friends, care for me. Every fresh track in the snow, every gift left beneath a full moon, every sudden hush in the canopy is a reminder of that covenant. I no longer keep a calendar. My seasons are marked by the rhythm of our unspoken exchange, by the soundless footprints that appear after storms, by the soft hum I sometimes hear on windless nights. I live alone, yet never alone. The forest holds my story, and somewhere beyond the next ridge, a once lost child of that ancient line remembers me. What began as an act of simple compassion has become a life shaped by something greater than explanation. I do not need the world to believe me. The proof walks these woods, breathes this air, and leaves gifts at my door. And every time I touch the necklace at my chest, I feel the quiet truth of it all, an endless conversation between our worlds, spoken in silence and trust.